Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I am an adrenal fatigue recovery ninja and I want to talk to you today. Welcome to another edition of your Adrenal Fix. Today I want to talk to you about adrenal fatigue and fatty liver. Are they related? What do they have to do with each other? Is there any type of correlation between the two? Been getting a lot of questions about fatty liver on the fan page. And I thought, okay, you know, it's probably a good idea to talk about this because it really is becoming the next epidemic. There was a research journal article in 2015 saying that fatty liver or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is the next epidemic. And it really makes sense. And adrenal fatigue and adrenals being exhausted is an epidemic as well. So what could possibly be the relationship? And so I like to drive my daughter to her soccer games, and so we had a soccer game this weekend up in Jacksonville, and it's about a 4.5-hour drive, and so I really dig into my old or any of the research conferences that I've been to, being able to delve back into case studies and really do my CEUs at this time. I'm able to actually do some research on these drives, and it's really exciting for me so that I can help you guys, and a couple light bulbs go off during these things where I've heard these, you know, sessions probably 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, probably a little of my OCD tendencies wanting me to listen over and over and over again. And certainly I always hear things that I didn't hear the first time. And I thought this is perfect to talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease because it's really becoming an epidemic. And so let's talk about the relationship. There's some common threads, and the common thread is stress. Adrenals are our stress-fighting gland. They send out hormones to deal with stress, to reduce inflammation, to fight an infection potentially, or to deal with a pathogen, or to help the immune system, to help be able to balance your hormones, so to speak, and also to be able to balance your glucose levels and to be able to help regulate your electrolytes. And so what about the liver? Well, the liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, we're seeing it's really a stress-related illness. And when I say stress, we're talking about the same stressor. So if we have a pathogen, if we're not able to balance blood sugar, if we have medications, and we'll see medications are really detrimental for the liver. We'll talk about that in a second. But ultimately, the wear and tear of stress on the body will not only impact the adrenals and cause them to fire off improperly, it will also cause that liver to be more susceptible to having a fatty liver. And so we'll also talk about basically the two are characterized by a mitochondrial shift, which ultimately means, hey Margaret, it's good to see that people are able to comment today, because last time it wasn't like I was insecure and I needed to hear the love. I just didn't see any hearts or any thumbs up the whole entire the entire podcast or the entire live webinar, and I was thinking no one is liking what I'm saying. Maybe it's not interesting, but I knew better than that. I knew it was really interesting. But anyways, I'm glad to see you're there. I'm glad to see. I don't know why I wasn't able to hear the last time, but anyways, the two are characterized by mitochondrial shifts. So what does that mean? It means that the mitochondria goes into a cell danger response, which means when it's unable to produce enough energy to meet the demands, and say there's a pathogen and it starts to sense a stealing of the electrons, so to speak, of the Krebs cycle and ATP and oxidative phosphorylation, all that biochemistry stuff, it shifts gears and it processes energy differently. And so it's a metabolic shift, and it slows down the thyroid, it slows down other functions that aren't important, and really free radical and antioxidants is the major concern. And as a result, what happens is it doesn't utilize oxygen, it's conserving oxygen. And when it conserves oxygen, it is fermenting glucose. And when it ferments glucose, it produces a lot of lactate. And when that happens, we have more of a likelihood for chronic illness, cancers, and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So ultimately, the upstream, the cellular level of how stress is impacting not only our warning signals in our adrenal glands, but our actual liver, our most underrated organ of the body. Did you know that the liver is at rest? I think it's probably 26% of the weight of all organs, yet it utilizes 80% of all the oxygen at rest. So it's a very, very metabolically active organ, and 80% of it is, besides red blood cells, 80% of the liver is actually water. So it's a very, very important oxygen demanding organ, and if we're not getting enough oxygen because the mitochondria is conserving its oxygen, then we're more likely to develop fatty liver. That's a bit of a difficult concept, but just kind of take it at face value. The first thing I wanted to say, actually, I was in Starbucks today. Now, I wasn't getting a coffee. I was actually getting a tea because I'm off the coffee. Little hinges swing big doors, and we want to try to help conserve our sympathetic, sort of parasympathetic balance. And when we're driven with coffee and glucose and sugar, that will create a metabolic shift, and that will create an anaerobic processing of energy to the point where you're fermenting glucose, and you're more likely to develop a metabolic illness. And that's what cancer is, and that's what fatty liver is. So it's a different sort of end of the continuum. It's further down the road, or you have more susceptibility for one than the other. But anyways, I was at the Starbucks today and had someone come up to me, and we were just talking, and they were asking me what my opinions were on certain genes, on this cancer gene. And actually, they were from a supplement company, and they were looking to get me to become a distributor, and they wanted to know my opinion on certain things. And what about this gene? And all our supplements are formulated for all these genes. And I'm like, oh, they're talking to the ninja. They have no idea that I know as much as I know. And so I was telling them, they were asking my question. I said, look at it. As much as we can talk about MTHFR, we talked about MTHFD, that's another enzyme we'll talk about in a second. We can talk about PEMT, which is what's responsible for making phosphatidylcholine, which helps make your bile and concentrate it and help you absorb your fats and help you move along your lymphatics and your toxins and get them out of the body. And that's one of the reasons why pregnant females have cholestasis or gallstones or nausea, because their phosphatidylcholine demands, their methylation demands go up, and they're not able to keep up with supply, and as a result they have this cholestasis, and they're not able to make phosphatidylcholine. So they say about 65% of women that are pregnant are phosphatidylcholine or choline deficient. Yet when you look at the prenatals, there's no choline in there, and there's mainly folic acid, and we're still scratching our head saying, how on earth in 2017 is this happening? So one of the first things I would say, just as an aside for this Facebook Live session, is making sure females that are pregnant are taking phosphatidylcholine. Super, super important. And that's the reason why you had gallstones, Paula, because there's a genetic component there. You're having to make a lot of energy. You're making a little baby in the belly. You need a lot of methyl groups, and if you are not absorbing that very well, you're not breaking down protein, you're not utilizing minerals, and you have some genetic mutations or SNPs, you're not going to make a lot of phosphatidylcholine, and then you're going to get that stasis of the liver, stasis of the gallbladder. So that's the other thing I was going to say is next week I'm going to do a talk on SIBO and the relationship between SIBO and adrenal fatigue, because I was doing some research for that in this presentation, and I just want to say, wherever we talk about liver, fatty liver, you can say the same thing for gallbladder, the exact same thing. So there's a relationship between adrenal fatigue and gallbladder, adrenal fatigue and fatty liver, and this is what we're talking about today. And so she asked me at the Starbucks, what do I think about these specific genes? And I said, you know what, really it comes down to stress. It really does. It comes down to how's your fight or flight mechanism? Are you constantly wound up? Are you able to rest and digest? Are you breathing oxygen? Because our liver needs oxygen, our cells need oxygen, our mitochondria needs oxygen. So if you're in overwhelm and you're a shallow breather, or you don't breathe properly, or you're not getting a good exchange of carbon dioxide out of the body, then you are going to become more acidic. You're not going to balance your minerals very well. You may have more acidity in terms of pathogens in the body, which is ultimately going to be stressful for the liver and predispose you for adrenal fatigue and fatty liver. But I said to her, actually it comes down to the liver. It comes down to your ability to utilize stress and nutrients and your life so that you're not in overwhelm, number one. Number two, it comes down to balancing your glucose and specifically fructose. I'm sorry if you can't see this. I'll try and make you look a little lower. But basically, fructose, research has shown that only 25 grams per serving of fructose is actually absorbed by your enterocytes. So basically by the cells of your digestive tract, and namely your colon or your small intestine. And what that means is, let's say we have I would never drink it, but let's say someone has a Mountain Dew or has a root beer. These drinks, they have about 46 grams of fructose per serving, and your body can only absorb 25. So what does that mean? What happens to the remainder? The remaining portion sits there and it just ferments and it feeds the bugs, and then it makes its way to the liver, and the liver doesn't know how to process it properly, and it goes down that anaerobic metabolism and creates a lot of triglycerides, free radicals, fatty liver. So fructose is probably the number one villain. And guess what? We're getting fructose in fruits. Fructose, and I actually saw a stat in Capri Sun. Capri Sun is what we give kids usually for little juices in their juice boxes, and Capri Sun could have as much as 25 to 35 per serving. And how many of those are they having a day? And there's these little guts that can't absorb it, and they're born already with a toxic environment from whatever mom vector transmits to them in utero. So they're already born with the predisposition of having a fatty liver. And then fructose in the fruits that we eat, unfortunately pineapples and raspberries and berries and honeydew and melon and dates, they're really, really high in fructose. And if you have too much of a serving of that, it's going to feed your bugs. It's going to go directly to the liver. It's going to go down the wrong pathway of being metabolized. And as a result, it's going to create fatty liver. And we'll talk a little bit about how that creates, on top of that, breakdown of the mitochondria. In a second, we'll talk about that. So yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that. Now, what else can be causative for fatty liver? Well, ultimately, if we're not breathing properly, because we need oxygen for ATP to be produced via the oxidative phosphorylation, kind of fancy terms that we're talking about, but we don't want to be able to use glucose to go down the fermentation pathway to produce lactate, and to also go down that pathway where candida is being fed, and we're not truly using oxygen for aerobic glycolysis. Big problem. But the thing that we also see is there is a genetic component. So, we talked about, hey, Paula, you said that you had gallstones when you were pregnant. My guess is that you probably had a PEMT enzyme which wasn't working at full capacity, and as a result, you're not able to make choline in order to repair your cell membranes. And really, that's when this lady asked me, well, what do you think about the fat genes? And I was like, what? Someone who's fitting in genes that is overweight and they're in fat genes? I said to her, no, like the genes that, are responsible for being fat. And I was like, I don't even know about those. And so she was trying to tell me what her supplements were. And so I just let her know she's way down the stream. Upstream from that is phosphatidylcholine is necessary to repair your cell membranes. So if we're in oxidative stress and we're conserving a lot of the electrons and the hydrogens in order to make free radicals so that we can fight fight off infection, and we need to make antioxidants to balance those. We got a lot of oxidized cells everywhere, oxidized cell membranes. So that's when we feel old, achy, sore, brain foggy, graying of hair, wrinkles, and that's where the messages of hormones and vitamins and minerals and neurotransmitters are trying to bind to the receptors that are programmed on the cell membrane, and then that's where we lose epigenetic control, meaning the mitochondria has no loudspeaker telling it, hey, there's glucose here or insulin's here and he wants glucose to come into the cell. Or hey, it's really cold. You got to put a couple of logs on the fire. Let's get T3 to be able to, speed up metabolism. And it's interesting because the body has a way of healing itself on purpose. And sometimes if we have a fever, we'll give anti-fever medications. But it went into a fever on purpose. It went into a fever because it wanted to, cook out that bug that can't exist and live at that temperature. But in our overzealousness, what happened was we end up, taking away that natural response of the body, and so that the pathogen can potentially stay around longer. And I see the same thing with thyroid medication. A lot of people have no antibodies to their thyroid, and they don't have an iodine deficiency, but yet their T4 and their T3 is super, super low. Why is that? It's because the cell membrane is oxidizing. It's losing the ability to communicate to the mitochondria. The mitochondria loses control, and it shifts the way it produces energy, and it no longer is listening to the messages of thyroid, and it's shutting it down at the conservation of using those nutrients and those electrons and that oxygen that's in really, really short supply in order to fight that cell danger response. And then you get a shifting of your metabolism. And that's exactly what happens when we're in overwhelm, when we have adrenal fatigue, when we have all of these issues. So that's really important. But really it comes down to also the drugs, the medications. I mean, alcohol is going to be a sure step away from fatty liver. When we're talking about methotrexates, we're talking about NSAIDs. I mean, how many people are being put on NSAIDs? Acetaminophen. There's been warnings in research studies that if acetaminophen causes acute liver failure, and I've talked to one parent after the next on their kid who had a fever after they had a vaccination, and then if that wasn't enough, then you had the knockout uppercut punch with the acetaminophen after, and really, really damaging that liver and the mitochondria in the liver. And where does 85% of methylation activities take place? Takes place in the liver. So when the liver's not doing a good job, it's not going to be able to make energy. It's not going to be able to repair itself. It's not going to be able to make things. It's not going to be able to break things down. It's not going to be able to make gallbladder support nutrients like bile and phosphatidylcholine. So all of a sudden you're not absorbing fatty acids. We're not absorbing vitamin D and vitamin A, which is really pro-immune system. So now all of a sudden you have this vicious cycle of fatty liver, not being able to break down things, not being able to make things, not being able to absorb things, and it's a big problem. The other thing that we see, so the acetaminophen is a huge one. And so what typically can we do about this? Well, the other thing I wanted to talk to you is what different tests can we look at? So some of the tests that we can look at is we can look at, a lot of people don't look at it, but you can look at the free T3 to reverse T3 ratio. And when you look at that ratio, it really gives you a good idea on how much of the T3 is utilized by the cell so that it can be metabolically active. And so typically we like to see that above 9. At 7, I start to worry, but I like to see that above 9. We also like to look at the free T3 to free T4 ratio and get a good idea on how well you're converting, because 60% of thyroid conversion takes place in the liver. And so you may be, taking a lot of thyroid hormone, but that liver that's fatty, that's not being able to process, digest, detoxify, absorb, manufacture, store, is going to be very problematic. Then all of a sudden you're not going to convert T4 into T3, and your ratio is going to go lower. Your reverse T3 is going to go higher, and now all of a sudden you're wondering why doubling your thyroid medication is not working. You're not getting to the root cause of the problem. The other thing I wanted to say too is as far as so what are the different tests? Obviously, looking at your BMI is really, really important. I think there were studies that 60% of people that are higher than a BMI of 30 is likely to have fatty liver, and 80% of people that have a BMI of higher than 40 is likely to have a fatty liver. The other thing too is, I think it was 15% of non-obese patients have a fatty liver. So, we got to look at what are we being exposed to? Are there pathogens? Are we taking methotrexates? Are we taking NSAIDs? Drinking a lot of alcohol? Do we have acetaminophen problems? How are we breathing? Are we getting good absorption? Are we getting out, and are we doing the common sense things? Because guess what? There's no pill for fatty liver. It comes down to, well, let's take the gallbladder out, and that's one of the most top 10 common surgeries that they have out there right now, and no one bothers to ask the question, well, did something fall out of the sky and hit you on the liver, and now that's why we need to take it out? Or was there some pathogenesis? Was there some problems that were occurring along the way? And is there something we can do to, address those things? Because unfortunately, when we do a surgery and we take those things out, the problems that predispose that for becoming congested and becoming fibrotic or becoming scarred or becoming just completely unusable was because of a reason. It didn't happen out of nowhere. So you got to look at that. The other things we like to look at is triglycerides. Typically, if I see triglycerides higher than cholesterol levels, it's pretty diagnostic for insulin resistance. But if you see triglycerides being low, then that's usually less than 60. Some sources say less than 75, but I know if I see it in the 40s and 50s, then there's some bile issues, there's some biliary problems, and ultimately there's some absorption issues. And you got to look at your fructose intake. Obviously, we want to look at your liver enzymes. GGT is a very, very important one, and one of the best ones that you can actually see that's most predictive of fatty liver issues is your fasting insulin. And I don't see enough people that order their fasting insulin so that we can get a good idea on how they're doing. Adenosine is something else we'll look at. That will tell me if we have ATP, the A stands for adenosine. If you are not able to recycle that adenosine, it's probably telling me that mitochondria is not doing a great job, so that will tend to go higher. And then of course we can look at some markers like your MCV and your MCHs to let us know how well are you absorbing your folates and your B12, and that could be predisposing you for phosphatidylcholine issues. And then of course we look at ferritin levels. Ferritin levels is our ability to store iron, and there's a whole Facebook Live on that. When iron goes too high, then we see that's an acute phase reactant. We know we have inflammation, yet your C-reactive protein looks good, and your your sedimentation rate looks good, and there's no inflammation here, so there's nothing wrong with you. And that's not the case. Was there anything else that I wanted to talk about? I think I kind of flew through that. What I should do here is, because I'm getting questions here, I'm going to address those. But basically the bottom line is that it comes down to lifestyle. It comes down to what can you do about it. You need to move and breathe and try to get oxygen circulating. We need to get out of sympathetic overdrive. We need to reduce and remove the things that are causing the predisposition, so the medications and the fructose and even the fruits, and looking at your insulin levels. And we make sure we have our patients look at their fasting glucose at different times of the day, and we try to reverse engineer, okay, what did you do that caused it to be in such a great range, and what did you do that caused it to be not in such a great range? And now we start to see correlations between how we perceived the day before, what time we had our last meal, how our sleep was, what was our macronutrient breakdown from the day before. And sometimes you'll actually see some people do better in a higher carb diet versus other people. And then sometimes you'll see people that do worse. And you need metrics to figure that out. And you can't just look at the blood work. The other thing, obviously, is food addictions. You know, sugar is a real food addiction, and I'll have a lot of people that says, I just can't do it. Well, what happens is, if you're not getting proteins and you're not absorbing them, and you have candida overgrowth because of you're feeding the bugs from all of that excess fructose above 25 grams, then all of a sudden you are going to have your insulin levels spike and go up and down. So you get shaky, lightheaded, jittery if you don't have a meal, and when you eat a meal, you feel relieved, and then when you have a meal, you crash and you get tired, and no matter how much eating of sugar you get, you're just not satiated. There's a good chance you have not only fatty liver, but the adrenals aren't doing a good job of kicking in and allowing that cortisol not to fall too low, and then your HPA axis gets broken down. Then we get cortisol that continues to skyrocket, and it hits that hippocampus area in our brain, and so now we get brain fog. Our circadian rhythm goes off, so we crash in the middle of the day. It's midnight and we're wired, and then we get forgetful, and we can't smell. That's all temporal lobe stuff. The other thing we need to do, so with that food addiction, it's not so much that you need that glucose. You do in terms of get your endorphins and your dopamines. There's a difference between craving and physiological hunger. And so craving is when potentially your glucose levels, you don't know, you say they're low, but if we took a glucose monitor and looked at it, they probably weren't. What you're seeing is your dopamine levels are low. There's no protein that's going down that pathway in order to make your building blocks, and you get sort of ramped up, or you feel agitated, or you feel like you're not motivated, you're tired, and you need some kind of sugar fix. And it's like that addiction. You get it, you get that temporary pleasure, that temporary dopamine response, but it's a fool's gold. You're not actually getting the protein absorbed and going down that proper way to be able to help you with a sustained relief in terms of this is fixing the problem, and I'm fixing the gut breakdown, I'm fixing the inflammation, I'm reducing the immune reactivity, I'm fixing the gut bugs, I'm not robbing from Peter to pay Paul, and I'm getting to the root cause of the problem. And then the other thing is I'd look at hydration too. So those were some of the things I wanted to talk to you today. I know I sort of flew through that, but if you have any questions, I can see your questions today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and look at what you guys have asked me, and then I'll ask it. Hey Linda, I hope you're doing well. Hi Margaret, you got gallstones when you were pregnant. We saw that. Hey Amber, hope you're well as well. Deb, is it true that antidepressants play a huge role in fatty liver? I would have to look at the mechanisms on that. I would imagine, though, that if we kind of think through it, if we are depressed, potentially the same thing we just finished talking about, Deb, where your proteins are not being absorbed and we get a little bit of a tryptophan steal, where the gut bugs and dysbiosis is stealing away those raw materials to create a lot of excitatory mechanisms. That's ramping you up, or that's not really going down the calming you down pathway, and we don't feel real pleasure with that. So do I feel that it causes the fatty liver? It's kind of that chicken or the egg, because medications, like I said, will be processed and being broken down by the liver, but it's just too hard of a reductionistic question to come up with, a one answer model. I would need to know whether any post-traumatic events, what is your current living situation, what do you do for a living, what is the family history, how is the gut health, what type of foods are you eating, are you balancing your glucose, is there any major infections, What other medications are you taking? So it wouldn't be like, oh, well, your antidepressants are the reasons why your liver has a predisposition for fatty liver. It's probably the reason why all those things are causing fatty liver is the same reason why you need to take antidepressants. That's probably the best way I would answer that. Margaret, maybe for a later comment, I am reading the telomere effect, and they are suggesting that stress shortens telomeres, which causes aging and fatigue. Is it the result of the adrenal fatigue or what? It's, Margaret, that's again like the chicken and the egg question, but that's, ultimately when we have stress, we are having to, our cells are dividing at faster rates, and ultimately that is going to shorten the telomeres. And so what was the question? Which causes aging and fatigue. Is that the result of adrenal fatigue? Again, adrenal fatigue is a term. Adrenal fatigue is a sensor that tells the body it's under stress. So are you saying, is the stress that shortens the telomeres as a result of stress? That's kind of what you're asking, and that's what it is. So adrenal fatigue is not so much an actual phenomena per se as it is a bunch of different mechanisms that cause breakdown that further shorten your telomeres. I hope that answers your question, Margaret. Michael, hey Michael, hope you're well. Great, and Dr. Stephen Edling, hope you're doing well too, buddy. So Julie, how do you test for fatty liver? Well, we talked a little bit about that. There's a lot of inferences that you have to do. I would look at insulin levels, fasting insulin levels, ratios of thyroid levels, HDL levels. You need to really do a cardio, a complete, like, the Boston Heart cardiovascular stuff that looks at the small particles, and you have to look at RBC free radicals or oxidized cells. I like to look at the genetics, obviously. I want to know about the pathogens. I want to know about your liver enzymes. And then, I hate to rest my hat on one hook and say this is what it is. You also have to talk to the patient and get an idea, and then ask them how well do you regulate your glucose levels. And they'll say, well, what do you mean? I did a blood test, last year and I was 92, so I'm fine. Doctor says I'm perfect, and my A1C is only 5.7, and it should be below, 6.0, so everything's great. Or your body's tightly regulated and it is below 5.6 and it is below 99, but yet you have every characteristic subjectively of glucose problems in terms of shaky, lightheaded, jittery, can't focus, get tired, get energized, crave sweets all day. No matter how much you eat, you need more sweets. You rely on coffee to get you going. To me, that trumps the glucose and insulin and even A1C tests, but it's a matter of using your information based both on subjective assessment forms, objective assessment forms or objective testing, and then by golly listening to the patient. Anyways, Julie, I hope that answered your question. You're welcome. I think that's it. So next week I'm going to talk about SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and the relationship that has with the adrenals and stress, and the relationship that has with the liver and gallbladder, and the relationship that has with genetic testing. And ultimately, like I always do in these little Facebook Lives, what I like to do is tell you about just sort of the problems that I'm seeing. I mean, I'm seeing, like Julie said, how do you test for it? I'm seeing people come back to me and telling me, oh, well, the doctor said my blood tests are normal, and that, I'm just a little bit high on cholesterol, or I'm just a little bit high on my liver enzymes, but I don't need to worry. And so I guess the way I sigh when I hear that, because number one, most of the times those tests are so inadequate in terms of there's so much things that are missing from there, that, again, I always joke around, you're looking just through a little looking hole and you don't see all the stuff that are over here, and then the ranges are so wide that you have to be really sick before they are worried about it. but I like to be proactive, and I like to, not get nickel and dimed for 15 years, spending thousands of dollars only to, be told that there's nothing wrong with me when I know deep down there is something wrong with me, and you guys just can't figure it out yet because the insurance model that's broken that allows for BS tests and the medications that are used in a reductionistic way to fix this and fix that without looking at the 12 different mechanics that are breaking down is not solving the problem. And so I see a lot of people that are frustrated, that are sick, that are exhausted, and unfortunately, we're getting sicker and sicker as a society. We're seeing non-alcoholic fatty liver disease being a real epidemic at a young age. And guess what? There's a lot of hope. I had a consult today with a gentleman, and we talked about his 6-year-old son, and the son had some genetic susceptibilities. He had metal exposures and things like cadmium and lead and arsenic and cesium, and he had some genetic predispositions, but he also had a mixed microbiome, and my guess is that liver, even though I didn't have the specific tests, the liver's not doing a good job, and who knows what kind of foods he's eating. He's probably eating a lot of fructose. He's producing energy from non-aerobic ways, and he's fermenting lactate, and what's happening is that's creating fatty liver, and it causes a vicious cycle, and then he's got focus and concentration issues, and we really need to fix that. But the good news is that as bad as society is getting, information is getting better and better, and we can do a lot of natural stuff. So the ladies at the Starbucks asked me, well, what can you do to fix that? And I was like, oh my goodness, what can I do? I can know your glucose levels, I can know your ketone levels, I can know your heart rate variability, I can look at your sleep patterns, I can get an idea on what are the big stressors in your life, I can look at your genetics, I can look at your immune markers, do you want me to keep going? I can look at all those things. And ultimately, who of your doctor is doing that? They're not. And so I look at it in terms of the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja is the advocate. I am what I call your power of attorney when it comes time to looking at your health and seeing the small little things that are deviating off of the road that 1 or 2 degrees to the left or the right over time. Any person who's an engineer will tell you that system will break down sooner than later, and when it does, it's going to be more expensive than if you would have just gotten it fixed in the first place. And you're not going to fix 12 different problems with 1 different pill, and ultimately 7 different pills. You start chasing your tail and trying to take an 8th pill for the side effect of the 2nd pill, and a 9th pill for the side effect of the 3rd pill. So it's just really frustrating to me, because at the end of the day, when I talk to you guys and I want to know how much this is impacting your life, we forget how much money we're already spending in terms of $500, $600, $700, $900 on insurance already, which I don't utilize, $300, $400, $500 on tests, $100, $200, $300 on supplements. Come and look at my little pharmacy here of all these little supplements that I'm taking. Here's all the stacks of paperwork that I've done, and really there's nothing wrong with me, and I'm crazy, and I just need to accept my fate. What happens is a lot of you have accepted your fate, and you forget to dream, and you forget to wonder what it would be like if you didn't have these problems, and how much you can't put a price on that, and how much more painful it is to not do anything than it is to do something. And there's a lot of things you can do. Your liver can regenerate and it can heal, but you need to do it now, because every day you go further and further down the road, the harder it is to get back. So it comes down to the real reason as why. Why do you do it? I do it because I want my kids to enjoy a life that I didn't have to be so stressed out and coming out of school, $250,000 worth of student debt, and starting a business and moving to a new country and being exhausted with adrenal fatigue, wondering how I'm going to fix this and get myself out of this hole. And now it's dedicated my life to being able to help others that have the same problem. I don't want them to learn that hard way. I want to have meaningful time, and I want to be able to not stress so much, and I want to feel healthy, and I want to, those are my whys. So when I'm tired and I'm exhausted and I'm overwhelmed and I feel like I can't eat the elephant in one bite, I get back into these are the reasons why. And so you need to do the same thing too. And the last thing I would say is make sure that you celebrate the times that you're doing, that you are seeing some improvements, and the things that you do every day that need to be recognized, like get up and put that happy face on. And even if you're canceling and flaking out on people and not able to keep up, you're still showing up. You're still doing what you need to do. You're still trying to figure it out. You still, even though you don't know why you're doing it and what it would look like, something's inside of you telling you that there's more out there than this, and you haven't lived up to your potential yet, and you haven't looked at the fact that the authentic expression of yourself hasn't been realized yet, but you have a lot more to cross off your to-do list. And if that's you, then you should really think about setting up a time where you and I talk and we try to understand, A, what's not working with your health, and where do you want to be? And if I feel like I can bridge that gap, I'm going to tell you how to do it. If I don't, I'll give you some recommendations as well. Number 2, let's look at that environmental component. 5 kids is enough right there, but potentially there's been 25 exposures of antibiotics. I've had, Epstein-Barr virus. I've had heavy metal toxicities. My dental mercuries were removed. I lived in a moldy house. When I was younger, we had this atrocious thing that our dad did. I mean, it's the perfect storm. And then the last thing we look at is the genetic component, where mom did have an autoimmunity. My dad died, knock on wood, early. I had an autoimmunity at an early age myself. I had 3 miscarriages. I can't detoxify, and I have to take anxiety medications. And I remember being, depressed at 8 years old. That's the perfect storm. And guess what? The doctor is not going to figure all that out, because if you have MTHFR, all you need to do, in their opinion, is to take methylfolate and everything's great. So anyways, I went on a rampage there. If you guys have any other questions, let me know right now. I would love to answer. If not, there's no more questions. So hope you guys have a wonderful evening, and I will look forward to you and talking to you on the next Facebook Live. Once again, my name is Dr. Joel Rosen. I call myself the Adrenal Fatigue Recovery Ninja, and my goal is dedicating myself to helping you wake up from your adrenal fatigue nightmare. Have a great evening.